German Ambassador Andreas Peshka says South Africa must form a stable government that will continue to sustain long-term relations with his country. The comments come as members of the Government of National Unity have varying views on foreign policy. Thabo Mbeki, School of Public and International Affairs Professor Anthoni van Nieuwkerk is joining us for more on that. Prof, good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on this evening. For the first time in 30 years, if you like, the South Africa's young democracy is facing uncharted waters, really, where the ANC has not managed to get a majority and therefore can't form a government on its own, would rely on other parties. Do you think, as these negotiations are going on right now, foreign policy is part of the considerations?
Yeah, good evening, Thabo, and thank you for the opportunity. We lived through tense days, if not hours, and everybody's waiting for the announcement. I think it's a reflection of the difficulty of the coalition partners coming together, uniting around a common program of action, which will then automatically make it easier to allocate positions. In fact, I think we're getting closer to a government of national unity if 10 of the 17 political parties have decided to join the fray, so to speak. But it also makes, the foreign policy priorities slightly more difficult to negotiate and to agree upon. It's very much like domestic policy or economic policy or social policy or education, foreign policy should ideally be based on a common understanding of our national interest. And if the parties to the agreement can unite around that, what is in our national interest? What is it that a diplomat should be selling abroad? What should she protect and advance in the name of South Africa? If they can reach that basic agreement in coming days, then I think it won't be too difficult. But I want to say at the very same time, even if they agree on the basics of our national interest, in fact, there's a national interest document that DIRCO released. And in my own view, if you read the National Development Plan, or hopefully the new emerging one, then there's your national interest. It's really about, poverty reduction, making the economy grow, getting jobs going, bringing stability to the country, and so on and so forth. It's not difficult to work it out. But there are ideological differences in that grouping. The ANC is very used to promoting its own brand of progressive internationalism. And it has friends in the international community that it prefers to work with and associate with. And that is not what the DA necessarily believes.
So let's talk about that. You've got the Democratic Alliance, the party that is the second largest number of votes, if you like. It's pretty much anti-Russia, if you would want to put it that way, pro-West in its posture. South Africa would not, under the ANC, I suppose, have said they are anti-West, but of course their leaning is towards Russia. How is that posture likely going to change now in a government of national unity?
Yeah. I think there are problems in reconciling these differences. Our political leaders from these different parties don't speak the same language when it comes to the war in Ukraine between Russia and NATO, supported by Europe and America, or what is happening in Gaza as we speak, and Lebanon, Thabo, as we speak. There's a deepening and a spreading of the war. And the ANC is very clear where it stands on these big issues. I would say, if you have to bring the parties together and reconcile what the DA disagrees with, they disagree vehemently about these positions that I'm talking about. Make Africa your focus. Make Southern Africa and Africa your starting point for your foreign policy. What is good for South Africa and Southern Africa is also good for the continent. And indeed, I also believe that we shouldn't choose between the East and the West. But see if we can promote African interests, particularly around economics, trade, peace and security, and the promotion of democracy. There is your basic program. Whether they then disagree about other things, they'll have to fight it out. In my own view, Thabo, where I think we should go with in the next 5 years is we're a very prominent member of BRICS. And BRICS has now expanded to many more members, and others are knocking on the door, particularly now the Asian countries. And we have to ask ourselves, as an African country and an African leader, what is our role in BRICS, which is a very powerful association of countries looking after their own economic interests. And I think there is where the work of our diplomats lie.
So if we look, for example, at the campaign trail, not the party positions themselves, but in the campaign trail, very few parties, except for the ANC, would have mentioned foreign policy issues. In fact, of all the issues that DA raised, foreign policy was not one. In fact, Helen Zille said our focus is domestic issues. Inkatha Freedom Party did not mention foreign policy, and nor did Patriotic Alliance. And most voters were instead as well preoccupied with domestic issues such as job creation, service delivery, and so on and so forth. Should that be something that, I suppose, parties in the GNU set aside and maybe continue with the non-aligned stance that the South African government has always been talking about?
Yes, yes. I like yourself, I think I found it difficult to find the foreign policy nuances in the manifestos and even in the election campaign, except for the big flags, you know, Ukraine, Gaza, and so on. But let me bring foreign policy closer to home. And this is where the GNU really needs to pay a lot of attention, Thabo, which is our immediate neighbors. You know, Lesotho, Eswatini, Mozambique, Zimbabwe. There are issues there that are troubling. We've got problematic borders. We've got a border management authority. And that relationship, that very close relationship with our neighbors, we have to normalize it because many people complain. And there's lots of, you know, attitudes towards our neighbors. In fact, this is part of our domestic policy debate, is our immigration policy. And who do we give jobs to and on what conditions? And what do you do with illegal immigrants, those who are undocumented? And what do you do with this wave of crime that is flushing over our borders and has actually taken an international character? Right there, the position of home affairs and domestic affairs become critically important for the members of the GNU. I really hope they find each other there without, you know, ending up in a debate around racism and the skepticism that many South Africans have towards our neighbors.
The ANC has also been very strong on the reforms of the global governance system, including the United Nations Security Council. Do you think they are likely going to push more for that in the government of national unity?
Yeah, you know, almost every member of the global south, of the developing world, complains about the composition of the Security Council. It is an important issue because once the Security Council takes a decision, it's enforceable, it carries weight. But those members, those 5 members of the Security Council also carries a veto right. So they keep on opposing each other. There's a big global game going on there. And everybody in the global south says, but we also want to have a seat at the table, from the Indians to the Nigerians to the South Africans to the Brazilians and so on. This is a debate that will go on for the next 10 years or 15 years. I think rather we should spend our ambassadors, our diplomats, those who represent our interests, should make sure that the UN system works better. You know, Thabo, when you look at Gaza and the humanitarian crisis, the UN is unable to bring peace to that part of the world and to render humanitarian assistance. Their hands have been tied by the superpowers. And I think the UN, we need the UN to protect our interests and to advance, you know, justice worldwide. And for that reason, I think all members of the GNU should make it their business to make sure that the United Nations works much better and in the interests of people, not politicians or superpowers.
Here's another area of great contestation, ANC's long-standing support of Cuba. And you know that there's money sometimes that they want to send there, and the DA would want to oppose that particular alignment. And the history of Cuba and South Africa and how that history for the liberation of the country is likely going to play out in the government of national unity.
Yeah, it's a very long-standing relationship, and there's nothing that the members of the GNU, the incoming members, can do to dissuade the ANC, the party, or the SACP, COSATU, and the ANC, the alliance partners, from maintaining cordial and strong relations with Cuba and other countries that have supported it in the past during the liberation struggle. In fact, the way I see it is they are party-to-party relations. In fact, in addition to Cuba, Russia, and others, there's also the question of the liberation of the ruling parties in the region, Frelimo, SWAPO, the ANC, and others in the region, also in Tanzania. I think it's healthy for parties to have party-to-party relations, because that is where they can discuss and deepen their ideological bonds. The DA can do the same with parties that they are happy with and that they will find in Europe and elsewhere, maybe in parts of Africa, Zambia, for example. And I don't think that has to be an obstacle to the smooth operation of the GNU, the incoming Minister of Foreign Affairs, and DIRCO itself. I think they need to focus on promoting our national interest. That is really, and at the heart of that is our economic interests at the moment.
Yeah. Speaking of those economic interests, I mean, AGOA is one such economic interest that, of course, has been debated quite a lot, and whether we stand to lose that yet. It remains a contentious issue. The Republicans would have raised it and raised alarms. The Democrats kind of, in the middle of the road about it. So we dodged the bullet a little bit. But with the developments in America, should a Republican president come back into power, is that likely going to bring, I suppose, back that expectation that South Africa should unquestionably take sides when it comes to this issue of the West and NATO, or otherwise be kicked out?
Yeah. Look, the bigger picture is that we can't avoid, whether we have a GNU or a coalition or 2 or 3 or 10 or 17 parties, it doesn't matter. The government of South Africa going forward will face a very troubled and troubling and unstable global environment, where there's a lot of pressure on African countries to choose this side or that, either the West, American-led NATO type, empire, if you want, but also the rising giant in the East, which is China and the BRICS and the expanded BRICS alliance. There's a lot of pressure, invitations, but also threats on South Africa. And Kenya just, I don't know if I should mention this, Kenya just gave in to the Americans and have been declared, as the darling of Biden's administration. And the problem is, once you agree to run with the one or the other side, you very quickly have to carry out tasks, because you're a minor partner in a bigger picture. I don't think AGOA, our trade relations with America, is under threat, because in fact, I think it's less of a threat now than before, because the Americans will probably look at the South African government and see a coalition or a government of national unity composed of many parts and feel more comfortable. Because the threat really was that the worry amongst the conservatives in America was that the ANC is very focused on close relations with Russia and China, and these are not the Americans' friends. I mean, they see them as the enemy. I think that situation has changed now, and I'm not worried about our trade relations with America, nor our very important trade relations with the European Union, because I think our trade representatives and our diplomats have already done groundbreaking work in making sure that we maintain a steady ship when it comes to building trade relations with East, with the West, and the South.
MK's foreign policy, decisively anti-West. EFF foreign policy, decisively anti-West.
Yep.
If the coalition or GNU falls apart and the ANC is forced to lean that way, what is likely going to be the outcome?
So the GNU falls apart, they can't agree on this, that, or it lasts for 3 months, or, it's not viable or sustainable. And another scenario comes in, ANC teams up with the EFF or MK. MK is going to Parliament, which means they're accepting the system, the way I see it. Then you've got another kind of ideological sort of coalition coming together. And then we're back to where we were a year ago, where the Americans will be very worried that South Africa is being captured by Chinese and Russian interests, and they will put enormous economic and diplomatic pressure on South Africa to change course. And they can use economic instruments, to punish us. They've got big investments in South Africa. And the Americans, they play a nasty game. If you are not on their side, they can easily close you down, your economy. We're a small economy compared, globally speaking. And so for example, if we sell goods to Russia or China or to the countries that the Americans don't like, apart from sanctioning them, they will sanction us selling goods to them. So then we'll be in big trouble. And I think the Europeans, given that there's a rightward turn in politics in the EU, will also find it very difficult to accept this new coalition, if it ever comes to be, of an ANC, EFF, MK type ideological orientation. And I think we will lose traction with the Europeans and the Americans, the West in general. And it's not automatic, Thabo, that the Chinese or the Russians will pick up such a coalition, because I think it'll be damaged goods. I think our economy will tank, as they say, as the economists say. And the Chinese are not known for carrying, losers with them. They very much want to align with successful partners. And indeed, in the BRICS coalition, which is where I go back to, where I think our fortunes lie, they are winning nations and very powerful ones. Yeah. It is for our diplomats to work out what our own role and position in this enlarged BRICS coalition ought to be. And it's going to be a bit of a trade-off. We'll have to give something in order to receive something.
Prof, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on and joining us this evening. Professor Anthoni van Nieuwkerk. He's the Professor of International and Diplomacy Studies at the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs and at the University of South Africa. Right.